James here with another tutorial on how to use the integrated software for business. Today we're going to talk about how to enter in accounts payable invoices. We're starting on the master menu and we'll get to the accounts payable system by clicking on the accounts payable tab at the top. This has put us onto the main menu for the accounts payable system, and we'll select option number 1, normal processing. We're now ready to enter or change a transaction batch. Before we do that, we need to understand what a transaction batch is. The accounts payable system is designed to allow a large number of accounts payable clerks to all work at the same time. So, invoice entry is organized into batches. A batch is simply a group of invoices organized by accounts payable clerk, so that a single clerk can enter in all of their invoices and check their work, proofread their work, make sure that everything's good, and merge it into open payables without having interference from any of the other accounts payable clerks. So we'll enter in our transaction batch and we'll put in a batch identifier. This can be the name of the accounts payable clerk, or an assigned number, or whatever works well for your company. Since for this example I'll be the only accounts payable clerk, I'm just going to use a batch number of 1. Next, we select the default company location and department that will be used for expensing these invoices. We'll leave it as it defaults, and then choose the bank account that will be used to pay these invoices. Again, we'll leave it as it defaults and choose Save. We're going to enter in a total of 3 invoices, and our first one is going to be the payment of our monthly rent. So the vendor for that is our landlord, and so we'll just start typing in landlord, and it pops up with a prompt for that vendor, which we select, and go down to the invoice number. Now for this, we don't even have an invoice. We're just expected to pay our rent every month. So for the invoice number, we're going to use the first day of the month. And we'll go down, and in our example we've chosen to pay rent for the month of March, but our default fiscal period is coming up with the current fiscal period, which is February. So we need to change that to March and then put in a description. We'll put in an invoice date and the total of the rent due. Now, if you noticed, I didn't type in decimal point. If you leave it out, the system will automatically put a decimal point in for you. Of course, you're also welcome to type one in, but if you just want to speed up your typing, you can leave the decimal point out. Our landlord doesn't offer us a discount, so we'll skip over those fields and go to the date due, which is the last day of the month. The Pay Now box allows us to take a shortcut in selecting invoices to be paid later on. For this example, we'll leave it unchecked. And the Prepaid box allows us to say that this invoice has already been paid by some other means, perhaps a hand check or a credit card or something like that. Again, for this example, we'll just leave that alone and go to Save. Now at the top here we see a summary of the information we've entered in so far, our vendor, our invoice, fiscal year and period, total amount due, and so on. Down at the bottom we have lines that correspond to general ledger account expenses. So it defaults to the general ledger account that is set up in our vendor master file record, which is appropriately enough rent, and the amount is the total amount of the invoice. All these are exactly what we want, and all we have to do is hit Save. Now we're ready to continue on and enter in our next invoice, which is from the telephone company. So we'll choose Continue with this batch, and we'll choose our vendor, which is the telephone company. So we'll start typing in telephone. Up pops our prompt. Select that vendor, and just like the landlord, the invoice from the telephone company doesn't have an invoice number, so we will put in the date of the invoice instead. You don't have to use the date of the invoice. You can use whatever invoice number you want that makes sense for your company. I suggest using something that is consistent and helps you easily identify what this expense is for. When we go to fiscal year and period, the system remembers the last fiscal period that we used. But now we're entering an invoice for the month of February, so we need to change our fiscal period back to February and put in a short description. And now we put in our invoice date and the invoice total of $100. Like the landlord, the telephone company does not offer us any kind of a discount, so again we skip those fields and put in the date that this invoice must be paid. As before, we'll skip over Pay Now and Prepaid and just choose Save. Again, our work so far is summarized at the top. And down below, we see the general ledger account that is set up for this invoice to default to. And we have the total amount of our invoice. However, our invoice has two categories that for this example, we want to track those individually. So we're going to add a second line to our invoice by either pressing F6 or clicking on Add Another Row. Now we can break up our invoice into two pieces as it appears on our invoice. This isn't strictly necessary, but for this example, we'll show how that works. We'll change the amount from the $100 that it defaults to put in the $95. And on the second line, we'll put in the amount of $5. The system sums those two together to $100, which matches the $100 we put on the previous screen, so we can just hit Save. And we're ready to continue with our third invoice, which is for parts to put into inventory. So we'll click on Continue with this batch. Select our vendor, which is Acme Parts, so we'll just start typing in Acme. Our prompt shows the vendor to use and we select it. And this vendor does have an invoice number to enter in, so we'll enter that in. And put in the fiscal year and period that this expense occurred, which is still February. A short description. The invoice date. The total of the invoice. And now, thankfully, this vendor does offer us a discount of 1% if this invoice is paid within 10 days of the invoice date. So we'll go down to our invoice discount percent and put in 1%. Our discount date is 10 days from the date of our invoice. And our invoice is due to be paid on the 1st of March. We'll hit Save. Again, we see a summary of our work so far. And down below, the general ledger account where this expense belongs. On our invoice, we have several parts, but all those really go to the same general ledger account. So on this example, we won't break them out and we'll just hit Save. We've entered in all three of our invoices, so we'll return to the normal accounts payable menu. Now what we want to do is check our work. So we'll choose option number 2 to edit the transaction batch. We need to select our batch, which is batch number 1. We can optionally print this out for a paper review if we want to, but we won't do that here, so we'll uncheck that box and click View. And here we can see the results of our work. We see our 3 invoices, the amounts, we see the detail of each general ledger account, and if we find a problem, we can click on the invoice number to go in and edit that invoice and make any changes that we need to. We'll just hit continue now. At this point, we're satisfied that we've done our work correctly, so we're ready to merge it into Open Payables. So we'll choose option number 3. We select the batch we've been working on and choose Merge. The invoices are now in Open Payables. In addition, a report has been created of the general ledger accounts that correspond to the expenses that occurred, and those are in reports. And that's all we have to do to enter in accounts payable invoices. I hope this tutorial has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at Edward Rich & Associates.